Designers and Builders, where design meets construction. We explore groundbreaking trends and talk to the pros reshaping our spaces. For your dream home, workspace, or just great design inspiration, subscribe to Designers and Builders.
Hey, welcome to today's brand new episode of Designers and Builders. I'm your host, Alyssa Olson, and today we're welcoming Maura Rockcastle, principal and co-founder of 10 by 10 Studio in Minneapolis. How are you today, Maura?
I'm great. It's hot out here, but I'm doing good.
Awesome. That time of year, it's not the dead cold of winter.
No.
Awesome.
No. Humid, sticky, and smoky.
Yeah, unfortunately, those Canadian wildfires are more frequent
and
than
Boundary Waters fires, too. We're supposed to be headed up there in a couple of weeks and are a little on edge about whether we'll be able to do the trip.
Hoping for the best. Yeah. Well, all catastrophes aside, thanks for being our guest.
Of course.
And it's excited to have you. And let's just jump in. So our background is we worked together when you were leading Tom Leader's Minneapolis studio. Also both UPenn grads, also both college ultimate frisbee players. So a lot of stuff in common there. But what about your origin story in landscape architecture? How'd you find your way into that world?
Yeah. So I went to undergrad for fine arts and was doing a lot of work in the printmaking and sculpture studios, thinking about time and microclimates. And I started making these sort of big drawings on paper, putting things through the press that I shouldn't have been putting things through the press, like raspberries and homemade tea bags with different organic materials in them. And then I would come and I would water them to encourage mold and growth and sort of study them over time and put in motion a process that I couldn't always control. And I had a very insightful professor who started asking me, more about this way of thinking, and had I ever been over to the landscape architecture department. So she sort of pushed me to start to think about what the implications of this way of thinking might be in other professions as well. I also happened to have a former babysitter who was in the Masters of Landscape Architecture department. This was at Cornell University at that time. Liska Clements-Chan, who now teaches at University of Oregon. And when I visited her in that studio, she was doing all these incredible mud drawings, and it was very aligned with the kind of materiality I'd been looking at in the art studio. So I sort of discovered the whole field of landscape architecture through Liska and through that insightful printmaking professor, and decided to go to grad school right away. I didn't take a break.
Right.
Once I had found it midway through my BFA, that was it. So.
Awesome. That's incredible. Yeah, I always love when people in a landscape program come from a background that supports it in really unique ways. And we can also see, we were just discussing your cyanotypes in the background.
Yeah.
Which are super cool. So, yeah. And then, post grad school, what between grad school led you to co-founding your own firm?
So after grad school, I have a sort of history of moving maybe quickly through things and not taking very many breaks. I mean, I graduated and I started work the day after graduation at James Corner Field Operations. Was given the opportunity to work on the High Line, and was sort of like, take it or leave it, but you have to start right now. So I did not hesitate, and I started that job then the next day. I was with field operations for 4 years, and then was looking for a kind of different conversation, a different approach, different perspectives, and shifted over to Snowhetta. This newer New York office at that time. I was a small group of landscape architects, interdisciplinary architecture and landscape, so kind of gave me that opportunity to think about design from a slightly different perspective and lens, and collaborative way of working. And then I think through that whole period of time, I sort of always had in my mind a long game of possibly starting a practice. I didn't know where, if it would be on the East Coast or back home in Minneapolis where I grew up. And I knew I didn't want to do it alone. My dad is an architect and had a practice in Minneapolis while I was growing up. So part of me also was super resistant to this idea of starting my own firm. having grown up with somebody who wasn't home very much and just gave his whole life to the practice, I was a little also nervous about making this decision, while also not being able to get rid of it as an idea for something I wanted to do. So I think at that point in time, after 8 to 9 years working in New York, my husband and I had a small child at the time and were just ready to come back to Minneapolis. Wasn't ready to start a practice yet, but I was more excited about putting a practice in motion here where I had deep roots and a lot of connections to the land and to the communities. So I eased into that, took some time off, taught at the U, worked for Tom Leader's studio, met you. And then I think after a couple years of jumping around between a bunch of different things, met Ross Altheimer, who had just come back from the Rome Prize, I think a year after I had returned home. And we had a lot of shared kind of ways of thinking about the practice, shared dreams for the way we would like to work, which was different than what the practices here at that time were offering. And so we sort of had a couple of awkward conversations around, well, do you want to try to start a practice together? Should we go after a competition? We like to think of it as like awkward dating, like early dating conversations. Like, do I ask? Does he ask? Do I wait? So we ended up doing a competition for the Chicago biennial. It was a kiosk. So we designed this sort of sensory kiosk on the edge of the lake. And it was super fun process. I think we learned a lot about each other in those first few weeks and decided to then start 10 by 10 from there. So that was the beginning.
Incredible. That's so cool. And I love that little courtship situation.
I mean, like when you're getting into a partnership for a practice, like a business partnership is different, but there is so much you need to share and talk about and be able to communicate about. It is, everybody talks about it as a kind of a marriage, or the only, relevant relationship similar to a business partnership is like a marriage of some kind. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And what were the things that you wanted to do differently in your practice?
Mm-hmm. There was a lot of interest in thinking through how to do community engagement and community-driven design in a more direct and open way. I think that was, when would this have been? 2013 to 2015 was, I think, when that shift was happening across the profession to be more intentional about how you engage and how to do community engagement properly. Stakeholder engagement, I think, was a little bit more of an obvious piece of the work that we did. But we were looking at it in terms of how we partnered, who we partnered with, and then I think how that frequency or that relationship building with the communities and with the people you're working with could really be more powerful and more integral to the process. So that was one thing we were talking a lot about, wanting to make sure that we approached that differently in a more committed way. And then also, I think, had come out of some different practices where the approach to design was fairly hierarchical and sort of based in a couple straightforward methods: sketching to maybe model building to, putting it in the computer and moving forward from there. And we were really interested in how a deeper understanding of the site and the materiality of the site and spending time in these landscapes could change the conversation or help us find design in more authentic ways to each site. So I think that commitment came from different places for both of us. For me, it was probably a little bit the pedagogy of education we had at Penn, where we're exploring in the field in very analog ways with experimentation and curious methods, and starting kind of creative prompts from a little bit more roundabout questions about the site or the material of the site or time or sensory input, things that aren't necessarily seen. So that was a real interest of ours, how to do that professionally in practice and not just have that stay behind us in school, but pull that forward into our projects and help that define the work.
For sure. And I would say, that's not necessarily a common practice in our profession. You can easily go and apply a design to a site that's completely separate from what's actually on the site.
Yes. And I think, we have had a lot of really great conversations as a team about how we can continue to do this work and bring our clients along with us a little bit more closely. And then also for ourselves, thread that work more kind of palpably through the next phases. So how did we go from, something like these cyanotypes where we're thinking about sunlight and plant material and water and ice. This was sort of in the winter time, and exposure, in different ways as it relates to a kind of design, spatial design structure on the site. Like, how do we do this work and then show more clearly how it informed the design? So we're continuing to work as a team on how to formalize the process enough to give clear starting points, clear kind of transition or next steps for how you pull something that's more abstract into a conversation with a client or a community meeting, or use it to preempt a diagram or a concept idea. I think there is always good questions about both internally amongst our team and externally, like the value of this work or the direct impact. Sometimes it is a little bit harder to see, and the value is just, we got to spend 8 more hours out there in this site and feel, how the time and the day changed, or kind of got to feel how mucky it was and what it felt like to stand in that river edge for several hours playing in that mud, which I think allows you to think about design in a different way. Sometimes it's just hard to connect those things. So we constantly are trying to make the process more rigorous and more clear to ourselves and to others.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's a very experiential, place-based component. And it's like, how do you translate that into something that's very material-based, rooted in the place, but also has a spatial outcome at the end of the day? And obviously it would be different for every site, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And so then do you seek clients? Like, I know you have a lot of repeat clients. Is that kind of a foundational element of like, this is our process, and get your clients that align with that?
Yes. I think to different extents with different clients. Some clients are super excited when we show up with some of this stuff, or we're sharing bits and pieces of it in different ways. Like, for example, I think our City of St. Paul Parks and Recreation Board clients love this about our approach because it allows them to see how much we really care about the sites we're working on. And oftentimes some of these creative methods help us do engagement. So there's a lot of creative activity in the engagement, and we're pulling people into site walks and planting rubbings and kind of water quality testing and, other things that are a little bit more hands-on that have a different takeaways than for the community. When we engage in that kind of way. So they love it because it makes them feel like we love the site as much as they do. And then we've had other kind of more cultural or art-based clients. I think one of them is confidential, so I cannot say the name, but, a cultural museum where we were doing kind of exploratory work in the prairie, and it defined the whole landscape approach to these sort of stormwater potholes and the prairie, kind of defining the horizontality of the building and the roof and the plazas. And they, of course, loved we did a bunch of cyanotypes and some other kind of photographic prairie horizon studies. And they were super excited to think about and to show and talk themselves to other stakeholders about how that art engaged process actually informed the design. And because they had the language to do so, they were able to talk about the sublime and the horizon and the prairie and the art museum. And it was like, wow, to have a client that gets it this perfectly was such a gift.
Wow.
And then we have other clients who we sort of, know that they have a little bit more of a priority for hours and fees, and it's a little bit more of a typical traditional process. And so we're doing a lot of this work as part of our traditional site analysis work, but we may not always show some of this stuff in our, typical analysis diagrams as much as we would for other clients, because they're a little bit more cautious about how we're spending time, and maybe we can tell don't share those values as much, and that's okay.
Yeah. And that was something I wanted to dig into a little more. It's just that tension of the pressure of, time. It's time and money always. But then you also have the storytelling, but then you also have this kind of internal storytelling of like, well, we're going to be strategic about what part of our process that's very integral and very necessary we share. Like, how do you find ways to balance that?
I think there's always a little bit of teasing that out as we go. So in some of those earlier, even in the kind of contract negotiation, the way that we describe site analysis or site assessment or, existing conditions understanding, we reference some of those methods, a kind of, walking and spending time, a minimum of probably 3 to 4 visits to a site, especially if we're not local, just how to show them that being on site is valuable, walking on the site with them and stakeholders is valuable, and that there are ways that we look at and document the site through those different touch points in different ways. But we do try to seed our language, even in the proposal, such that there's an understanding of why this is important. And then in early presentations, we will show them that work, whether it is a little bit more photographic based for some clients who that is going to make them feel a little bit more comfortable. It's a method of documentation they've seen, but if we're looking at panoramas and then we're using more words or we're working on our language, like there's just an art, I think, to explaining why this work is valuable and important. And so we'll kind of seed some things in there, see how it's received, and we can then go further into some of those more abstract or analytical kind of process-based ways of describing the landscape, or peel back and have to get a little bit more traditional or tectonic about it, like pairing some of those photographic kind of sequence transects with sections and discussions of materials or things that, they're going to respond to because they're a little bit more obvious or known. So I think I would just say we sort of tease it out, see how far we can go. It depends where the client is at and what the goals of the project are and the priorities. And you do have to be careful about the funding because it's all connected, right? Like what our fee is also part of the project budget, and that's really important. And so being efficient is another actual design parameter that we love. And I think if you see it that way, it helps that tension not feel so intense or negative, because it's all about being efficient or strategic about how our thinking is contributing to the overall goal. We all want to get something amazing built. So it's not a waste, but if we spend more time in some of these spaces, we may not, be able to get where the project needs us to get. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a good question. There's a lot of layers there.
There are, and that's why I was like, I'd love like your take on it because it's always specific to everyone. Like how do you, given your resources, maintain efficiency within the project budget? Not only for the fee part, but then also the project budget, right? Those are two very different things.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of just careful management, and I think awareness of time and identifying the collective team goals or values for the project right away. So we have I think leaned really into our project management software, which sounds really boring, but it allows us to create buckets and thresholds. So we know what our hours need to be. We know what our goals are financially for ourselves, for our client. And then we can create kind of buffer edges to those that basically are numbers of hours. where if you flex and take more here because it feels really important to get to that next step, to make that next, set of decisions, and you need a little bit more time in that up front, you're going to have less later on. So it's just a kind of constant management, I think, question and balancing. But to be able to see all of it more clearly helps us make decisions about when to push, when to linger longer in certain phases or for, certain aspects of the design process. And when we're going to need to just be super efficient and maybe move through something faster than we would prefer. But we can also do that. It's just a different way of working.
Yeah. It's like, how do you do a give a penny, take a penny process, but then be profitable?
Build in fluff. Yes.
Yeah. And do you feel like you have all the right tools for that in terms of project management software and staff capacity? You laugh.
Not always. I mean, I think tools wise, like the project management software is super helpful. And then creating the tools and templates, I think making sure that the process is very clear, that a team that maybe has a project lead that hasn't been able to, for example, if we're thinking about just this more process-based approach in the front end of a project, if they haven't led that process before, like making sure we have the tools that's an easy, understandable thing for them. So we have lots of different Miro boards, but we have a whole process Miro boards where we have every project, what the kind of more creative methods, site exploration process, questions were, what the team decided to document and what tools they used. If it was something like these cyanotypes, how you make those. We just try to create easy ways for people to understand how to do this later on, and then to inventory, because I'm not seeing, some of the projects that Ross is leading. I may not be part of those conversations. So Eve, it's a tool for me to be like, the Mitchell Park domes, they actually went and they were taking tracings of all of the botanical leaves that had fallen that were on the ground. And that was their way of kind of inventorying texture and variation of the kind of plant material they were moving through in the arid dome, for example. So I just saw that the other day and I was like, oh, this is so fun. Yeah. So then it starts to surprise you. And it's just those resources help us, I think, share the knowledge. So it's easier for teams to deepen and expand them, ideas from there.
Yeah. Just kind of that transparency and shared pinup space, which I know Miro's great for that. And also your office. Like the last time I was there, you've got your work all over.
Yeah. Yes. This is a big, messy library.
Yeah. And it's also, I feel like, just such a good idea for just a longer term look at your office, if you get new staff or people have to kind of, it's a successional thing also, you're building along the way and that's going to keep your office going. We've already done these things. Here they don't have to dig for them or have that institutional knowledge.
Yeah. And you just have to make sure you have people who want to look there, who want to kind of carry some of this way of working forward, because that's also the risk. I mean, Ross and I aren't going to be around forever, but we're hoping 10 by 10 will be. And so and things always evolve and change, but I think keeping the studio grounded in this way of working and thinking and making sure people understand its values and that we're constantly kind of reading what, other people, kind of academic writing and other research in the world is doing, so that we're following along as things evolve. I'm hoping to meet up with Karen Lutsky and Sean Burkholder in the next few days to see all the work that they were doing for their Rome Prize visit this last season, where they're deploying different curious methods, looking at a lake outside of Rome. So I don't know. We also are just trying to look outward and not stay insulated or isolated with the work we're doing, because so many different people are thinking in this way and doing beautiful work with some of these questions. So that's another kind of resource on that process. Miro board is read this article, look at what this practice is doing, look at what this person is writing about, because it's all pushing and expanding and, helping us be better and grow too.
Yeah. And do you find that, for me, I find often with those time and efficiency pressures, is that something built into your office culture of hey, it's cool, just take the 15 minutes to look at this
Yes.
thing.
Yes. And I think the comfort of being able to just talk about it and have folks be able to express like, hey, I'm getting really nervous as I look at like, these are the hours that you have for me for this project this week. And I'm at that threshold, but I haven't done these things we talked about. Is it, like, should I keep going? And so in that moment, we'll, as a team, think about it, talk about it. Yes, this has a lot of value. What you're doing is incredible. So let's spend 2 more hours and see where we're at. Or actually, what you have is pretty amazing. You don't need to do those next things. I don't think. What if we just redefine the end goal? And shift towards, this other thing that needs to be done. So there's a comfort level in just transparency and communication and talking. And I think safety around all of this, which is, I think, carefully curated. We want to make sure the team feels comfortable asking questions, challenging the hours that have put in for them, and being strategic about all of it together. So sharing that responsibility and, again, not making it as top down, I think, as some of our experiences were in other practices.
Yeah. And it's funny, even you just saying that, like, I feel that sense of like safety of just like, oh, like it's okay to talk about that. And you don't just have to say yes to everything. You don't just have to push. Like your practice is more horizontal based and working as a team to achieve these other goals instead of that, like you said, the top down approach.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is, something we felt really strongly about early on. And then as we grew with people joining the practice, it became, I think at one point when it was maybe like in between 6 and 8 people, I mean, always there was a need to like clarify roles and titles, but we were maybe a little bit slow about that in the beginning. And we're kind of all growing and learning together. Ross and I obviously having a little bit more experience perhaps than some of our early team members. But when we started hiring people with more experience, I think there was also like a need or a desire from their perspective to understand where they were at. Like people are used to getting there's sort of a pressure out there to have a title, to be, have a salary that goes with that title, to know if you have X number of years of experience that you're probably making more than that person with less years of experience. So there's a lot of like external pressures, I think, also being put on practice, where when we're trying to be transparent or trying to be more horizontal, how do we do that and acknowledge the structure of the profession? So we do have titles. We do have a kind of salary ladder that has a level of transparency to it. We do align that with our more recent like ASLA Minnesota salary survey, for example, so people understand where we sit relative to other practices in this state. And then I think in how the titles work and how people, it's more circular. So while people have titles, they're kind of able to toggle around between different areas of practice, impact, culture, process, and work are kind of our 4 buckets. And people can kind of toggle around and test leadership opportunities or interests in different areas. So, for example, with task forces or director roles, you could have a director leading the process task force, or you could have an entry level kind of designer leading the process task force from one year to the next. So again, just trying to find situations where we can flip the hierarchy in order to allow people to step forward with leadership in different ways, and tell a director what to do sometimes, and kind of get comfortable with that. So it does start to level things out. Our team also has a lot of agency within the team to make decisions. So while we all collectively make decisions, I think there's a little bit more trust and agency we give folks, our teams, to make decisions on their own. That's my understanding from what I've learned from other practices, what I've experienced in other practices. There's a little bit more autonomy there.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many thoughts rushing through my head, but it's like you're balancing kind of like at that firm policy level of like, okay, we're defining these, like, let's call them strata, but it's only because it's a formality, right? You have to, for salary ranges and titles and that, but also the reality that in the landscape architecture profession, there's so many realms of scale, of type of work, of all these things that we touch. And if you get pigeonholed into one thing, how would you possibly grow? Like your
Right.
10 years of experience in one thing, if it's just the one thing, means you don't have all these other buckets
Right.
filled.
Right. Yeah. And I think, there is some people are very clear about, what their next 10 years looks like professionally. Some people are very type A, very organized. I want to get experience on this type of project and this type of project. I want to lead this and then this, and I want to do all this other stuff. Be involved in ASLA, get licensed. And other people are like, I just really want to spend time building stuff. I want to stay as more of a project landscape architect, detail the construction sets, think really about materials and how they come together. And I'm happy doing that for the rest of my life. So there's lots of different types of people also in the structure of the office, I think needs to honor all those different ways of working and growing and learning. So that complicates it as well.
It does. And I just had one of those conversations this morning.
Nice.
And it's a deeper seated question of what do I want for my career path? And I feel like we all go through that and it evolves and changes. And so I'm curious, how does that inform your project pursuits? Is that kind of a one-to-one based on annual reviews, or how does that, what does that look like?
I mean, we kind of have a gradient of a decision-making, a sequence of steps that help us staff projects. I mean, we do take into account what people have voiced as their dream project, their interest, their maybe gap in their professional expertise. So we try to fill those gaps or meet those dreams as best as possible. I think the priority for us, we start with just the fee for the project, what it needs, and who has time is kind of the first urgent parameter. But then where there is 2 or 3 people who could be plugged in, we do take into account their growth trajectory and what they have talked about wanting or needing to do. And then I think there's also opportunities where we'll shift people to different phases of a project. If somebody, doesn't have a lot of the process work and we have a project that really is going to revel in that, early space of a project, we'll plug that person onto it and then pull them back to, CA on another. So there is a little bit more fluidity, which can be sometimes disruptive, but we try to do it again with a lot of communication and talking, a lot of talking, to make sure that it's as least disruptive as possible and okay for the teams who are balancing that shifting of staff. I feel like there was another point I was going to make to help more directly answer that question, but it's gone.
It's okay. It'll come back. Ideas are like little ghosts. They'll float by again.
Sometimes they just float away. Yeah.
More than that. Yeah. And so then I guess my other question, just what's a dream project for you? What does that look like?
It does shift, I would say, depending on it changes. Right now, I think I would love a project that is a landscape-led, bigger scale, kind of park project that is on a site with a deep set of layers and maybe contentious histories. So something that really allows us to think about time and storytelling and cultural layers that may not be visible yet, but to have a big space so that we can think about larger systems and ecological structures in a more robust way. A lot of our sites are a little bit smaller and a little bit more constrained. So I'm kind of excited to just scale up a little bit. I mean, we have a lot of culturally significant and contentious kind of contested sites rather. But I'm looking at maybe merging some of those things at a bigger scale and see what that would be like.
Yeah, it's so ambitious because you have all of those deep historical layers and ecological layers, but then you also have the highly technical realities of how you bring that to fruition. Yeah. But it seems like, I feel like often in those scenarios, they lead to really beautiful, artful expressions on sites and the storytelling and all of that. Yeah. And I guess, are there other, projects in your portfolio of work that really stand out to you as a good example of that?
Yeah, I think projects that are starting to get closer at that scale or at being able to kind of explore some of those layers of a site that are difficult or traumatic or painful, that are sort of moving towards spatial situations that are healing or revealing some of those things. It would be historic Fort Snelling revitalization on the bluff where the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers, or Bedote. It's sort of a sacred Dakota site and also a military fort. So a lot of layers of trauma and pain embedded in that site, but we worked with multiple client groups. One of them was sort of a co-creator client, the Dakota Community Council, which I think helped us reinform and reimagine what restoration, culturally significant planting, storytelling, materiality, and even form and space, like how you move through a site that is painful to many in ways that maybe conceal certain structures or reveal things that people do feel kinship with, like the river or the bluff or the cottonwood or the prairie planting. So I think there's relationships that we're working on building and strengthening through how that whole landscape was designed. Also the Mississippi River Learning Center, which is right below Fort Snelling, also in the Bedote area, but at the water level. So now we're sort of thinking about connection and relationships between the land, but at the edge of the river rather than on the bluff. So the power of the river, the sediment, the silt, the flood, all of the regulatory layers that goes, not with just thinking of how the site will work and tell stories and be restored properly and remediated properly, because it's also a contaminated site, but how to do that within the frame of regulatory complexity. And there's a whole other sort of area of projects where the revealing of the kind of time and history is in the material stories. They're more post-industrial sites. So Mill 19, or Chattanooga. We're doing the minor league baseball stadium in Chattanooga, which is being nested into the former U.S. pipe foundry. And that landscape almost 85% is material reuse from the site. Doing these beautiful pipe benches using segments of old pipes that were cast on, in these foundries. And cool. I think cutting, revealing, and sort of organizing people movement through those structures is a big part of that design. So telling material stories, not so much maybe, well, those are also cultural stories, labor and struggle, work and product, creation. I mean, all the pipes that were made in here are like under all of our cities providing water. So I don't know.
Yeah. And remnants too, like these things that are such a part of the history and then they're just left on a site and abandoned.
Yeah.
But then how do you actually use them versus getting, filling a landfill and bringing in new materials and all these other things.
And getting the client to be excited. I mean, that's more maybe a case where that way of working is something the client is coming to us because they know we have a sensibility and an experience doing that kind of work. So creating this sort of whole new phase of a project that's salvage protocol rather than just a demolition set of drawings where you're looking not just to remove things from the site, but how to deconstruct things, stockpile them, and then redeploy them. How do you map that, put specs around that, and then tag things, organize things so you can account for them in the proposed design technical sets. So, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's a big positive trend in our industry right now is material
salvage.
Salvage materials. Like, are there other things that you've been seeing more? Anything that like on sites or clients are coming at you with?
I think there is a good way of thinking now that is also taking sustainability and resilience in mind for these materials, making sure that they're being tested properly so you understand any implications around reusing them. Concrete, we reuse concrete a lot, for example, but making sure that that concrete is safe to reuse and that the process of moving it from an in situ slab to either rubble or stacked slabs, that there's an understanding of dust and the labor aspects of kind of doing this work. So that has been, I think, more recent conversations and research that we've been really excited to be thinking about alongside, the material reuse itself, and trying to be creative with, how many different ways can you reuse concrete slabs that are coming out of the ground. But yeah, I've liked this new conversation of just really careful research to make sure that it's safe and environmentally strategic and beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you kind of have for example, when I was at Methuen, we had a red list, green list. Have you established a similar thing within your office, or does it kind of depend on the project as you go?
I mean, I think it depends on the project as we go. And for actually salvaged materials, that would be a cool thing to create based on what we've learned, where we can kind of flag all of the layers of the different materials we're reusing and where we ran into challenges being able to reuse them for any given set of reasons. Like steel members that have lead paint and need to be, remediated, for example, so we don't have that yet. But I think this is kind of our most interesting future research priority categories. So that's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, you could be the leader in that. Yeah. So I guess speaking of future, what do you see for 10 by 10 in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, that's a tricky question right now. Because I think it's been so dynamic in the last couple years, politically in Minnesota, in our community. I think I see the power of staying deeply connected to these places, to continuing to build relationships with the clients that we love working with and collaborators that we really admire and respect. I think in the last several months, the amount of conversations we've had with other peers in the landscape architecture profession, other, maybe predominantly women-led firms, where we're supporting each other in ways that never would have happened a decade ago, I don't think, in terms of what's being shared and how we're creatively thinking about pursuing projects in different ways. And just, I think, more open to collaboration. I see 10 by 10 being a part of whatever that becomes in the future, where it's just feels better as a community and more supportive. For example, staff sharing or, collaborating on pursuing projects with 3 women-led landscape leads, for example. It's messy, but there are projects where it can work just fine. You just have to find the way. And I think we have been working a little bit more towards just focus on projects that really align with our mission. I mean, we've always been focused on that. But we've been able, because we've been around for long enough, to be a little bit more selective. And I hope that we continue in that trajectory of being able to say yes to the things that really have meaning and are tied to our mission. And maybe be able to say no to some of the things that we have been doing just to sustain the practice, but are maybe less relevant to that mission, which is really to just address issues of our time through this work and elevate conversations of resilience and what just space means and looks like, and how you team properly to even have that conversation. So I don't know what type of project that is or where that is, but that kind of work and that conversation and pushing it and being open to it and being compassionate leaders all along the way is where I see 10 by 10 going.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that it's not specific project typology. It's more, it's like how you are exploring time and roots of a place. Like it's this more abstract thing, but it's mission and value driven.
Yeah.
And it's also, it speaks to Minneapolis, like with all of the things that have happened since 2020 and just the level of social resilience within that place. Like that's the thing that you're carrying forward.
Yeah. The way I feel more connected to everything around me because of all of this stress and difficulty in the last couple of years has so much power to it. So all the silver linings, I think, of what bring people together when they're moving through periods of, difficulty and stress are incredible. And so however that manifests into the design field and into our public realm, I'm so excited to be here for it. So,
Incredible. The evolution continues.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess, given your accomplishments in your career, like what advice would you have either for other designers or for a younger version of yourself?
To just make sure that you're slowing down sometimes and reevaluating, like looking up, reevaluating the context. Are you getting what you need from the place you're working, from the people you're working with? Are you challenging yourself in the way that you need, or do you need to just not challenge yourself for a little bit and just be calm for a while? I don't feel like I did that very well. I think I had like a kind of really clear trajectory, and I didn't take a lot of pauses until 10 years into my career. So I wonder if I had been a little bit more patient or taken more time earlier on, if I would have meandered differently and been open to more tangents earlier on, which I think are the things now later in my career that are the most empowering. And I think, and this I feel like is shared with younger people leaving, graduating from school right now, but advocating for yourself, like being confident enough to advocate for yourself. I do see that more and more, but that was not something that I did enough early on. And I support that. And I think more and more employers support that. So just keep encouraging people to speak up for themselves and advocate for themselves along the way in their early career.
Okay. Incredible. Yeah. Advice you can hear at any point in your career.
Yes, totally.
Especially early.
It's good to, I actually heard it for myself just now too. It's like a reminder.
Yeah, me too. I'm like, so relevant. It's wild. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Maura. It's always a joy to speak with you. All your insights, expertise. So how can people in our designers and builders community best connect with you?
There is our website. You can, I think my email might be on there. If not, it's just Maura at 10x10studio.com. But I love meeting and talking with people and answering questions and meeting with students. For now, it's not like we're bombarded with all these things. So these conversations are easy to have, but I love having them. So very open. Reach out anytime with questions.
All right. Sounds good. Now's the time. Get Maura while she's available. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Melissa.
And I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay. Take care.